Today is the feast of Saint Matthew, one of the 12 apostles, also an evangelist, the author of the first gospel. And his gospel is written primarily for the Jewish audience, the earliest Christians who were Jewish converts to Christianity. And his conversion, or his call, which we heard in today's gospel reading, is quite significant because he was a tax collector. And it's important that we understand the role of tax collectors at the time of our Lord. Recall that the Romans were occupying the area, so they were in control, and the Jewish people resented the Romans. They resented their control, they resented the restrictions that they placed upon them, and of course they resented paying taxes. The Romans understood this. The Romans knew this. And so they were very clever, and so they selected various Jewish people who would cooperate with them and basically collect taxes for the enemy, for the Romans. And usually what the tax collectors did is they would often charge more than what they needed to and pocket the extra for themselves. So for all these reasons, the tax collectors were hated by the Jewish people. And so it's not surprising that St. Matthew associated with other tax collectors as well as other sinners. And these other sinners are most likely public sinners, such as prostitutes. So we can imagine what a great sinner Matthew must have been, as well as all these other tax collectors and prostitutes and who knows what else was there. But our Lord not only calls Matthew, this great sinner, to follow him, but he eats with him. And he eats with all these other sinners. And of course, the Jewish leaders, they're just so shocked by this. Why would anyone do such a thing? In other words, the Jewish people, they understood that it's not a good idea to associate with sinners, because if you do, you usually end up imitating the ways of those sinners. I mean, even today, if you hang around with people who swear, you're much more likely to swear yourself. It's kind of obvious. But it's not just a question of hanging out with them, it's eating a meal. And traditionally, eating a meal implied friendship and acceptance. In other words, eating a meal with someone implied that you were on friendly terms, that you accept each other, that you in many ways respect each other also. And I think even today there is some truth to that. In other words, most people would not sit down to a meal with someone who was their enemy or someone that they just totally despised. So our Lord eating with these sinners indicates his love for them, his desire to want to help them, his desire to want to befriend them. And there's an important lesson there for all of us. But notice at the end how our Lord says, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. What does he mean by that? How are we to understand that? So the mercy he's asking for is that we be merciful towards others, including sinners, that we don't judge them harshly, that we acknowledge that they are sinners, but we try to love them. As St. Augustine says, to hate the sin, but to love the sinner. So when our Lord says, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, well, in some way it does require sacrifice to spend time with someone, but that's not the kind of sacrifice our Lord is talking about. He's saying that no matter how many animal sacrifices you may give to God in the temple, or how much you may tithe of even the most minutest things, all of these are sacrifices, but they're not going to make you pleasing to God. What's going to make you pleasing to God is your manifestation of mercy and love towards your fellow men, including those who are your enemies, those who are great sinners. Now, when we think of a sinner in relation to God, in many ways a sinner is an enemy of God. In the case of these tax collectors, they renounced pretty much their Jewish religious beliefs. The Ten Commandments, they don't obey them, they don't go to the synagogue. In fact, they're rejected by most of the people who would have attended synagogue. And so it's not surprising that they hang out with their own kind, fellow sinners. And in the process, they become even greater sinners themselves. So our Lord befriends these individuals. He eats with them, and in inviting Matthew to accompany him, to follow him, to be one of his disciples, and eventually to be an apostle, he is befriending Matthew, the sinner, the tax collector. And so the message to us here is that we too are called upon to befriend the great sinners, those who are opposed to God, the atheists. You know, it's one thing to just proclaim the truth to them, which even that many people find difficult. It's a lot more difficult to befriend them, to have a meal with them, to spend time with them, to get to know them, to be truly friends to them. And this is kind of an important point here. It's an important lesson, because it's only in befriending others that we show true love. And yes, it does require effort, sacrifice, commitment. It's not an easy thing. But maybe there's someone in your life that perhaps you might consider befriending. And when they see that you genuinely care about them, they're going to be much more likely to listen to what you have to say. The reality is that we are all sinners, and so God has reached out to us. He has shown his mercy towards us, and the ideal is that we do the same to those around us. Let us imitate the love that our Lord shows to sinners, to even the enemies of God, such as the tax collectors, such as St. Matthew. And let us ask St. Matthew to pray for all of us.